Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Hazman from the Academy of Sciences Malaysia, and I'll be your moderator for today for the session on Rethink, Reengineer, and Revolutionise Research in Tropical Disease. This session will be presented by Professor Dr. Yvonne Lim, Lian Fellow, Academy of Sciences Malaysia. So before we start, let me introduce a little bit background of Dr. Yvonne. So Dr. Yvonne currently works as a director at International Relations Office and as an academic staff at Department of Parasitology, Faculty of Medicine, University of Malaya, Malaysia. And Dr. Yvonne's research focuses on host parasites interaction and epidemiology related tropical diseases, primarily among the underserved communities. Her work has been funded by various national and international grants, for example, National Institute of Health, United States of America, using multidisciplinary advanced approaches. The theme's landmark publication with collaborators from New York University in Science, which unravel the mechanism of how low levels of helminth worm infections to promote the growth of probiotic gut, which is microbiota. She also has a vast network on local and international partnerships, and currently she is involved in the formulation of national policy for the development of Orang Asli, which is indigenous people in Malaysia, with the Department of Orang Asli Development, Jakarta, Malaysia. And without further ado, I would like to pass the session to Dr. Yvonne. Doctor, you may now begin your presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hasman, as well to Mr. Shafiq. Now, before I begin, I'd like to thank the Academy of Sciences Malaysia for inviting me to speak on this virtual celebration of the International Day of the Tropics. So please allow me to share my screen now. So today I'll be talking about rethinking, re-engineer, and revolutionize research in tropical diseases. As we medicine of tropical diseases covers infections in the tropics, such as hepatitis, malaria, dengue, and many others. And these diseases flourish in hot and humid conditions, and they are especially prevalent then in poorly financially resourced areas, as many areas in the tropics are. Now, as I'd like to reiterate the description that we have in our flyer for today's celebration. It states that in the tropics, we have about 3 billion people, and 55% of these people are below 5 years of age. It's covering about 40% of the world's agricultural research areas, and it's also experiencing a worsening impact of global change, of climate change and global warming. Now, this has important impact to diseases as well, because with global warming, the tropical region then will be expanding, and it is said that at a rate of 50 kilometers per decade. If this happens, then it will escalate the transmission of tropical diseases to uncharted regions. And this will create new opportunities then for pathogen to spill over, genetic diversification, and also adaptation. And if diseases that currently are found at the equatorial region will then be found in the subtropics as well as the temperate region as global warming increases. Now, we are very familiar with communicable diseases or infectious diseases when we talk about tropical diseases. However, diseases in the tropics covers much more than just infectious diseases. We also have the non-communicable diseases. In Malaysia, it's very prevalent. Diabetes is very prevalent. We also have hypertension, we have heart diseases, and now with COVID, I think mental health issues are being heightened. And I think these are diseases that we also need to pay attention to. Now, as we know, in the tropics, we are living in similar climate, and hence we are experiencing similar challenges to the climate change. However, in the tropics, we have very diverse cultural practices and nutritional habits. And we must not forget, there are many, many areas in the tropics as well, which are housing the vulnerable and the underserved communities in the tropics. So when we speak about diseases in the tropics, we need to look at the bigger perspective or a bigger picture. Now, however, for my talk today, I will focus on the communicable diseases. Now, as the face coronavirus pandemic, which we currently are still facing at different rates in different parts of the world. Many years ago, we also had the flu pandemic about 1 century years ago. And coronavirus has always been compared with a flu pandemic. But much earlier than that, in the 1300s, there was also the plague, which was plaguing the whole world. Now, do you know that there is an institute in Malaysia that has done good research that has contributed to the eradication of this disease, whether in Malaysia or contributed to global knowledge other than our Institute for Medical Research? Now, it was established in 1900, and this is the facade, the wooden building, which has housed many research on malaria, on filariasis, and other diseases. Now, IMR was very important to our country in understanding the kind of diseases that was plaguing our country, as well as they were doing research to enhance regional and global knowledge as well. In plague eradication, based on their research, we managed to eradicate plague in 1928. And then there was also beriberi. Now, although beriberi is not an infectious disease, it's basically a vitamin B1 deficiency condition. However, the research that was done in IMR, which elucidated the problem about rice toxin theory, was very useful because the importance of the germ area that is in the rice grain, which has lots of vitamin B1, and how it has changed the way that it was processed so that we could reduce this beriberi, was all done in the Institute of Medical Research. And following that, we also have smallpox. We have researchers that was developing and producing the vaccine for smallpox, and we managed to then eradicate in the later years. Filariasis, IMR was also instrumental in doing many research on filariasis, or the disease that is caused is elephantiasis. They were doing research on the parasite itself, the vectors, as well as the treatment agent on DEC. And eventually it helped our country to eliminate the disease just about 2 years ago. Now, malaria was also another important disease that IMR was looking at. And I'd like to bring your attention to the rapid field stain. Now, rapid field stain was basically developed by John Field. And he was a medical research officer in IMR. He joined in 1931 and he discovered the stain in 41. That was 10 years after he joined. Yeah, and this is still being used now, and is an important stain at that time, especially when they were doing field work. And there were many other work that they have done in terms of the treatment, the understanding the vector, and as well as looking into other possible causes of malaria, like what we have now, the simian malaria. And we hope that with their studies, in collaboration with many universities and other agencies, we hope that we will be able to eliminate malaria soon. So hence, we see that the Institute of Medical Research have had very impressive research achievements in the various diseases that I've highlighted. And they've contributed to not only national, but regional and global understanding of these diseases. Now, at that time, when IMR was established in 1900, we didn't have the word glocal. And I think glocal now is a very hype word now. You hear it a lot of time, whereby, things that connects between global and local issues. So you can see that at a very earlier on in years, the research institute in our country was already doing that. They were arresting local issues, local challenges, which have implication at the global level, and they were contributing towards global knowledge. Now, in 2016 then, WHO established PLab for the vector control products evaluation. Now, moving on, just about 2 years ago, again, the IMR team, which was doing on the maggot derailment therapy, they were conferred the Dr. Lee Juk-wook Memorial Prize for Public Health at the 71st WHO Assembly. So hence what I'm saying is that lots of illustrious experts who are doing good research. And the recipient that was representing the IMR team is none other than Dr. Nasni Wasi. And I also like to acknowledge her because it was Dr. Nasni and Dr. Lee Han Lim that has helped me to compile the slides that you have seen just now for the IMR achievements. Now, moving on, in later years, we were also establishing many universities in the country. Now, in 1998, in the late 1990s, our country faced what we call as the Nipah virus outbreak. Now, as you can see in this slide, the Nipah virus was basically brought about by the fruit bats, and the virus are contained in their saliva. And some of the fruits that are half eaten then will fall into the pigsty, and when the pigs eat these fruits that are contaminated, they got the infection. And at some point, the virus jumped to the human host. And at that time, we had to cull millions of pigs. And it all started at Kampung Sungai Nipah. So Nipah was identified. The disease was first identified in 1998 among the pig farmers by the team of researchers from the Faculty of Medicine, University of Malaya. And I'd like to share with you that at that time, our academician emeritus professor, Dr. Lam Sai Kit, was heading the medical microbiology department. And it was isolated in 1999 and named after the village Kampung Sungai Nipah. Now, at that time, we had 265 human cases, and of that, there were 105 deaths reported. And as I mentioned before, millions of pigs were culled by the authorities to stop the spread of this disease. Now, and these are the group of researchers that were helping the farmers to understand what was going on and to identify the virus and also to manage the patients. And they were recognized with the 2008 Merdeka Award, Merdeka Award for the work that they have done. Now, Nipah virus now has also been found in other parts of the world. And again, this is one very good example whereby our local discoverers, the work of our local discoverers has helped the regional community to then combat this disease now. This map is showing where Nipah virus is found now. It's now in the East Asian countries, and many of our researchers have been called to give their expert knowledge and to share their expertise in how to arrest this disease now in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in India. Now, it is said that the coronavirus that we are experiencing now, as you know, I think we have had very good review by the global community. And they have rightly pointed that Malaysia was able to successfully eradicate Nipah virus in the late 1990s. And lessons learned then has helped us to really be a leader now, to take on this battle with the current pandemic with coronavirus. So lessons learned are never forgotten. Now, next to Nipah virus, we also have the discovery of the Plasmodium knowledii in humans. Now, Plasmodium is not a new species. At that time, it was known as a malaria parasite, but in the macaque, in the long-tail and pigtail macaques. And they are rarely found in humans. In fact, we did know that they were found in humans until a large focus of human infections was discovered in Sarawak. And they were discovered, so with that discovery, besides the 4 Plasmodium that we know that infect humans, falciparum vivax, malaria, and ovale, now we have knowledii. And it was discovered by another researcher from UNIMAS, Professor Dr. Babir Singh. And he won the 2017 Merdeka Award. Now, the discovery of knowledii now is basically assisting many countries in the region, because now we see that knowledii is found almost in every country in Southeast Asia. And hence, with the experience that we have in Malaysia, in how we tackle and how we detect and how we have diagnostic methods are all being shared at in this region. Now, moving on, we also have USM with Professor Dr. Rahman Nuruddin, who developed the Brugia rapid test, which is currently recommended by WHO for the use of global program to eliminate lymphatic filariasis. Besides Prof. Rahman, we also have our president of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia, Professor Dr. Asma Ismail, who developed Typhi-DOT and is widely used now in the world. So we have, based on the slides that I've presented to you, we have many experts. We have illustrious researchers that are in our country. Now, moving forward, I think the pandemic has provided us with an opportunity to rethink, to re-engineer, and to revolutionize research in tropical diseases, and also to give us an opportunity to rethink our role in the global community in terms of how we tackle these diseases. Now, as I said just now, Malaysia has had many experiences handling diseases and outbreaks, and we have highly capable experts. We also have strong network of partnerships and linkages, not just within the country, but in the region as well as worldwide. And we are in the tropical region, which houses a high diversity of flora and fauna. And this is the area that's ever increasing in providing an interface between humans, animals, and the environment. Now, this interface can be a source of diseases, especially zoonotic diseases, which will impact public health and social and economic well-being of the world population. So, as the WHO Director General, Dr. Tedros, has once said, the pandemic is a reminder of the intimate and delicate relationship between people and planet. Any efforts to make our world safer are doomed to fail unless we address the critical interface between people and pathogens and the existential threat of climate change that is making our Earth less habitable. Now, how do we re-engineer and revolutionize our tropical medicine research? We really need to think out of the box. We need to work collaboratively and strategically, because at the moment now it's all about speed. When coronavirus basically swept the whole world, it's basically like a tsunami. We were all caught off guard. But once we had our foot on the ground, we just had to work very fast to contain. Now we need to work in a multilateralism manner and multidisciplinary manner. Now, we cannot wait because working in multidisciplinary manner needs time to engage, to have that synergy. So we really need to start as soon as we can. We need to do research in a borderless manner, in a shared manner, a sharing of databases. Now, I managed to attend one or two talks in the morning, and I think this whole essence of shared data was also highlighted by the other speakers. Now, we need to incorporate the One Health concept of looking at diseases not just from the human perspective, but from the animal as well as the environment perspective, and also the United States and United Nations SDG goals. Now, thinking out of the box, I'd like to use one example to illustrate how we can think out of the box in tropical diseases, in neglected diseases. So I've chosen this. Now, worms are one of our most ancient nemesis. I remember when I was young, my mom used to give me, deworming medicine. And I'm sure many of us have experienced that before. Now, and worms are infecting about 900 million children in the world. Now, as we know, the gold standard of looking at worms or diagnosing worm infections is microscopy. Yeah, and that's the gold standard. Now, and the worms that we have in our intestines has been around for many years, and they have learned how to co-evolve. They have learned that they need to live in the host. They cannot be too pathogenic, whereby they will kill the host, because if they kill the host, they do not have a source of nutrition and they will die. So they need to balance that coexistence between themselves as well as the host. And how they do it, they immunoregulate. They learn how to deal with our immune system. They learn how to balance so that it doesn't affect them and kill them ultimately. Now, our gut is not sterile. If we have worms in our intestine or in our guts, we also have lots of bacteria. And this bacteria is very important, as we know. I think we've heard some of the research being done to say that when you have a healthy gut, you have a good or healthy health, or good health, well-being. Now, the importance of this gut microbiota is that they play a critical role in regulating innate and also the adaptive immune homeostasis in our body. Now, what we did, so this is the research that I did with my collaborators. We wanted to discover if an individual has worm infections in the gut, how does it influence the gut microbiota? Does it weaken the bacteria? Does it, what bacteria does it proliferate? What does it enhance? So what we did was that we couldn't use microscopy because it won't tell us anything. We need to utilize advanced technology because there are secrets in these worms that we need to unlock. So we use the next generation sequencing. We had to employ advanced bioinformatics to really understand the many reads, the sequence we have, and to see what are they telling us. And we did animal models, we did community studies, and finally, to cut the story short, I will use an analogy of the garden. What we found was that if you have low numbers of worms, it can cause a high diversity of bacteria in your gut. And what we found as well, there are good bacteria that basically thrive. And because the good bacteria thrive, they basically suppress the proliferation of the bad bacteria, and hence they basically promote healthy gut in the individual. So in the garden analogy, if you have the earthworms, it does make the soil more nutritious for the plants to grow. Now, in individuals that had no worms, no worm infection, we found that there was low diversity of bacteria in their gut. And most of the time, we basically could see that there were bad bacteria that were thriving in these individuals. And their gut, there were imbalance of bacteria in their gut. So, well, this result was published in Science, and it was a collaboration between ourselves, University of Malaya, together with the New York University, and was supported by the NIH grant. Now, we also found based on literature that the worms was not just protective to individuals that has the infection, but it was also protective in individuals that have other diseases, other non-communicable diseases like diabetes, like cardiovascular disease. Hence, worms are basically not just altogether bad. And this reminds me of the saying that, sometimes in the midst of threat, you also find opportunities, because maybe there are two sides of a coin, and we just need to see with the eyes of positivity, with the eyes of opportunity, to see how we can utilize the threat and turn it around to opportunities. And hence it brings me back to this pandemic. I think this pandemic has really made the whole world vulnerable. We need to think ahead of the pathogens and the disease by utilizing all the resources and technology we have. We are very fortunate because we are living in really modern high-end technology times. We have the fourth industrial revolution, and the fifth is already here. Our researchers in biomedical feel ready to embrace this technology, this revolution. We have the big data. We used to have to produce sequences, many sequences in our genomic studies. We have lots of proteomic data as well. Now there are tools to enable us to basically align these data sets together and crunch them and understand them. So this information has to be harvested with improved understanding for us to understand the disease and also to develop new medicines and potential cures. We have the digital revolution here, already here at our doorstep. Our biotechnology revolution, we need to make use of them because they can change how we understand disease like never before. The artificial intelligence, the blockchain technology, now it's all at our doorstep. We need to incorporate this into our research. And, as I said earlier on, we have had, understanding about metabolomics, proteomics, and all. Now we have the tools, the omics revolution that can enable us, the machine learning to enable us to learn deeply into all these data sets. There are millions of data that needs to be crunched, that needs to be aligned, and that needs to be understood and interpreted. The technology is there. We need to make use of this technology so that we can understand if there are noble pathways, if there are noble networks, so that we can predict and we can have a prediction of health and also diseases for the future. And we can also use this information for biomarker discovery. Now, we have lurking threats in these pathogens. These pathogens are just around us, and they're just waiting to pounce on us when we least expect or when the situation is conducive for them. Now, we are intelligence beings. We need to work many, many steps ahead of them. So let us learn from the lessons from this COVID-19 pandemic. Now, we have worked together very beautifully in a systematic, coordinated way. We have shown we can do it during this COVID-19 pandemic. I think we have worked in a multidisciplinary way with multi-agencies. We have worked together with universities, together with industries, NGOs, and many others. Let's heighten the momentum. Let's heighten also the momentum of shared resources, of shared data. We cannot go alone because it's going on a very fast pace, and we need to work together in a team spirit. And we cannot underestimate the importance of evidence-based research. Now, many a times there is always this warpath between human intelligence, HI, and artificial intelligence. In the medical field, that with AI, potentially many of the human services will be then taken over by the artificial intelligence, I think we need to look at this threat again in an opportunistic manner, whereby how can we synergize and AI? Now, I like to think about it as the artificial intelligence can hasten the work processes and the outcomes of what human is thinking about, but the ideas and questions and meaningful interpretation will still need to come from the human intelligence. Now, beyond this pandemic, yes, what are the lessons learned, especially from the current pandemic? We have done well, but the threat does not end with the end of this pandemic. There will be newer health threats that will emerge, and how ready are we? We need to start preparing from now. We have the Malaysian strategy for emerging diseases and public health emergencies, 2 work plan, which will last us to 2021. Now we need to re-look at this work plan and plan for the next decade or so. Now, with that, before I end, I'd like to pay a special tribute to all the champions of the tropical diseases or diseases in the tropics in Malaysia. And I'd like to apologize because of space constraint. There are many others that are also the champions that I'd like to pay tribute towards. Now, with that, I'd like to end with this quote. The future is not someplace we are going. It's one that we are creating, and let's create it today. So with that, thank you for your kind attention. So back to you, Hasman.
Okay, I would like to thank you so much for Dr. Yvonne for your presentation and enlightening us with Malaysia's past success and eradicating certain diseases in the tropics and the opportunities as well as potential in moving forward post-pandemic. So actually, we do have a few questions from our online platform. So I would like to read it for you. So question number 1 is, what are the elements in common that influence and trigger the appearance, spread, and persistence of zoonosis in Malaysia?
Okay. Now, could I get the first few points again, Hasman?
Okay, sure. The question is, what are the elements in common that influence and trigger the appearance, spread, and persistence of zoonosis in Malaysia?
Okay, like I said, or I mentioned in my presentation earlier on, in zoonotic diseases, I think one of the important causes of it is because I think we have disturbed the habitats of the animal hosts of these diseases. As we know, zoonotic are diseases that jump from the animals to humans. And because of the tropics, we have lots of forested areas still available. However, I think it's rapidly being developed, and deforestation is really at a heightened rate right now. And with the narrow habitat that's available now, animals that are harboring all these diseases will then be moving closer into areas that are closer to communities, to the people. And when they have these places where they mix around with humans, the chances of the virus that they have being transmitted to the community, to the host, to other hosts will be heightened. Now, we need to be very mindful of our vulnerable communities that are still living in the forested areas, because I believe that because they have been living in the forest for a long period of time, their immune system may have been adapted to some of the diseases as well. And some of these pathogens may also be, learning by being harbored in this community that is, exposed to them before they start to be very severe into other communities that have not been exposed before. So deforestation, and like I said, I think when we look at diseases in the tropics, we really need to look at the environment as well and the animals as well, because there is all this interplay that's coming in. And as animals encroach into the human population, and as human population go into the forested areas for economic purposes and all this will actually heighten the risk, potential risk of then eventually the disease being adapted to human hosts, and then as they move along infecting more and more people, you have some that will be very susceptible and the disease become severe then. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. And for the next questions, and we have a question from James Cook, University of Australia. The question is, what is the state of mental health in the tropic currently?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I think it because it does allow me to expand a little bit my explanation about diseases in the tropics. Like I mentioned in one of my slides, diseases in the tropics is not just about infectious diseases, it's also about non-communicable diseases. And mental health is one of the health issues that are very important for us to look into at the tropics. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist, so hence I don't claim to be the expert. However, I'll share with you from the perspective of Malaysia. And then I think from that perspective, it is relevant to some aspect to countries in the tropics as well. Now, I think the mental state in the tropics is really underreported. It's underreported also because of our culture. Many communities around the tropics, we still have stigma, or mental health is still a taboo in our community. And hence, it's not something that we speak about, or for us to seek guidance or seek treatment. And hence, I think education is really very important. Now, as we know, in the context of Malaysia, we can see that in the recent years, especially after 2010, we have seen that there are statistics have seen a tremendous rise in terms of mental health issues or mental illnesses in our country. And it is said that very soon, in a 2015 National Health Morbidity Survey, mental health may even become the second biggest illness in our country after heart disease. So it is something that is really there, but is a silent crisis at the moment, which is just waiting to erupt. And I think we really need to focus on this. Like in Malaysia, what we have is that we have the Mental Health Act 2001. However, it did not come into effect until 2010. Now, because of this stigma, like I said, we really need to encourage people who have this condition to come. And one of the best way to do it is to educate our people from a very young age, to have it in our education syllabus. I know, yes, if you talk to the academicians, I think it's something for them to really balance, because again, in the culture that this is so stigmatized, how to educate them enough to know, and yet how to look at it from a very positive light to seek treatment, because this is something that we can mitigate, there are help around to help individuals with health illnesses. And in Malaysia, what we are doing now as well is to we used to have shortage of professionals in mental health. We also have shortage of postgraduate training programs. So we are trying to increase the kind of courses that's around, and also to increase the number of intakes that we can have. So, well, in the context of our country, I think this is where the private-public partnership needs to work together to see how we can heighten or to increase the kind of programs or trainings, and also, you know, the education curriculum to students in terms of this. So I hope I have touched a little bit, and I do believe that what we are experiencing in Malaysia is somewhat relevant to other countries. There may be other countries in the tropics whereby I think they may be slightly slower in this, whereby, you know, they still need to do a lot to sensitize the community into really acknowledging mental health in the communities. But this is where I think opportunities lies, whereby we need to work together to help each other to get our communities more engaged and more educated.
I'd like to agree with you because education plays a big role in,
Yes.
you know, to eradicate the mental health issues that we
Yes,
have.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll be moving for the next question. So the question is, how does climate change affect the health and wellness of public living in tropics?
Okay. Well, when I in my presentation, I've also touched about, you know, how climate change affects on. So I will use an example, especially in the vulnerable or the underserved communities who are still living in these habitats, in these forested areas. Now, in my line of work, in my research, I do a lot of research with the Orang Asli community and the other indigenous communities in the Peninsular Malaysia. And one of the stresses that they actually feel is when their land is being taken over for development. You see, it's and we have data even to basically provide evidence to show how these activities have affected their whole well-being. They may not have come to the hospital to say that, you know, they're stressed, they are very depressed. They may not. But what we have done, we have friends from another university that has done studies in these communities, and we can see that there are more and more hypertension cases in this community, which is quite rare. In 20, 30 years ago, we see much less cases of hypertension, heart diseases, cardiovascular diseases in this community. But in recent years, we are seeing that the cases has really jumped so much. And this is one indicator that they are experiencing certain stresses based on what is happening to the climate, what is happening to the forest. It's not just about communities that are living in the forest. With climate change, in terms of, you know, temperature rise, there are also communities, especially living in the coastal areas, that will be affected. And we need to do more studies about this, because it's not just about their economy, about, you know, their whether it will be affected, but it's also going to affect on their mental health, on how they're going to go about with their catch, with you know, whether there will be erosion in the places that they are living. So definitely climate change will impact on people, and when it impacts on people, it will impact on their health. And one of the earliest thing would be on our emotions, on our mental, and later on it will be manifested into various diseases when physiologically they are affected in a greater manner.
you, Doctor. And I'll just go forward with the next question. We do have a
Yeah,
lot of
sure.
questions today. And next question is, what are the recommended steps to curb the spread of these zoonotic diseases?
Now, it's not a straightforward answer in zoonotic diseases. So basically, like I said, research is really needed for us to really understand in terms of, we need to work with the forestry people. We need to work with the vets to understand. We need to ensure that animals are kept in the rightful habitat. And because when they are kept in a rightful habitat, the animals also do not feel stress. We must not forget that when climate change happens or when deforestation happens, it's not just the humans that are impacted, but the animals as well. And they undergo stresses as well. And when they undergo stresses, that's when physiological change, and that can also trigger the pathogens that are in them to basically mutate. Now, so we will need to really understand the effect of changes surrounding habitats into these diseases before we can then have measures. Now, of course, in terms of development, we need to be very mindful. I understand you need progress, you need development, but we need to really understand, is it at the cost of health? I think the coronavirus is a good example that has highlighted to us that we have moved very fast now. Take many steps back now to rethink, to reflect. And in terms of the zoonotic diseases, we really need to work together multidisciplinary to ensure that in understanding diseases, there are all these key stakeholders, together to see how we can manage this. We need progress, but at the same time, we really need to conserve the environment as well. And we need to ensure that the animal population and human population do live in sort of a synergy. And if ever there is a cross in terms of an interface or a zone whereby, these populations are interacting more closely. Now, how does this interaction impact on these diseases? But you see, the thing about diseases is that time is not in our hands. So we really need to work fast, and we cannot just work alone. It's when we work alone, understanding just the disease and not sharing that data with people that are in the other areas. We cannot synergize our management together. It's so important to understand these zoonotic diseases in a very multifactorial manner, to then have a proper mechanism to manage them. Now, I know that in Malaysia, there are already work being done, but we really need to heighten this and inject in the lessons learned from COVID, the lessons learned about the importance of data sharing. I know we are also concerned about data privacy, data security. Now, like it or not, we have to put all these mechanisms in place, because if we want to manage diseases that are going to come towards us, now the pathogens are already in this host. Yeah, they may not be severely impacting the animal host, but once they are introduced to humans, it may be causing us severe illnesses. So we really need to really work together to share data so that we don't reinvent the wheel, because I think we have spent a lot of time reinventing wheel, collating data sets, whereby now we really need to look at what data is already available so that we can integrate this data at different levels, use the technology to make us understand what we have right now and identify the gaps so that the gaps now then can be filled up with research groups that then can move on to fill these gaps so that we can move fast. We really need to work in tandem. We cannot wait for step 1 to finish before step 2 happens. Sometimes, you know, many things just needs to work in tandem. Yeah. So,
Okay. Yeah, for the next question, so I have from our Zoom webinar. So the question is, I would like to join together two questions, one question. So what is your take on heat stress cases in Malaysia? And also in tropical climate where it is hot, humid annually, how much do we know in terms of heat-related illness? Is it a lurking threat as well? Coming from Ching Song Fong from Zoom webinar.
yes. Again, this is something that I've not done research on, but definitely heat stress is something, again, that is important to look at. Now, in the tropics, what is very common is that in many countries, our buildings are cold. It's all aircon. And then when we move out of the building, that's where we bombarded with the high temperature, with the heat and all. Many a times we don't even recognize that our body is really regulating with, you know, these different temperatures that we are exposing our body to, and granted that, you know, when we are outside and with global warming and when temperature rises, well, our body will be constant, the pathogens within our body. However, with the external temperature rising and all, it does affect on the physiological mechanism that is within our body. So hence, I think we'll need to improve our understanding, especially heat stress in our tropical region, in the different regions that we have, in the different sort of ecosystems or microhabitats or microclimates that we have, to look into how basically this heat stress can actually impact on Earth. So it may not be in a form of like an infectious disease, a disease, but the heat stress, I believe it could accumulate in a person, the effect of this heat stress, and then it will be manifested in many physiological illnesses that can come later. So this needs to be understood. And what more, since we are living in the tropics, I think this is where we need to prioritize that we need different groups to look into different potential illnesses that can be caused because of the climate that we have, and also because of the changes to the climate that we are experiencing.
Yeah, I believe we have another questions, which is Malaysia anyway close to eradicate helmintic infection among orang asli? Are education and medication still the problem among orang asli? And because from my reading, both have been provided extensively for this particular community. This is coming from our Zoom webinar. It is about our indigenous people.
Okay, so actually, based on the studies that we have on the ground, helmintic or worm infection in the orang asli is still very much prevalent. Well, I don't have the data in my slides today. However, we have seen many studies that have been done by different groups, by colleagues from even different universities. It's still above 50%, and in some cases, we still have about 80% or 90%. Yes, I think the government has had many deworming programs, yeah, and in the general population of Malaysia, worm infection basically is very, very rare, whether it's especially in the urban areas, but there are pockets of communities in Malaysia that still has worm infection. Now, why is it, especially in the orang asli, that you still have very high prevalence even with medication? I mean, it's worm infection is an easy infection to treat. and the medication is still effective. However, there are also trends to highlight to us that potentially there could be some resistance to some worms are resistant to some of these drugs because it have been used for many, many years. Now, one of the problem is also about reinfection. In the study that we have done, in some communities, we may have treated them, but the infection can come back again in as fast as sometimes even within 4 weeks, within 2 months. So this brings me back to the environment. Now, if we know how worm infection is being transmitted, now basically, if let's say a person that has worm infection, and if they do defecate not in a vaccinated place, if they defecate discriminately, the fecal sample can contaminate the soil. And the worm eggs basically need the soil, moisture, and the condition that's in the soil. That's why they are called soil-transmitted helminths, to basically develop into a stage where they can infect humans. So in communities whereby they have infected individuals, their environment is being contaminated by the eggs of this worm. So we treat them, and potentially they're again exposed, their hands or sometimes even their vegetables are exposed to the feces that has these worms. And when they consume contaminated water or vegetable, they get reinfected again. So it really is a vicious cycle. And hence, I think we also need to look into therapeutic agents that can become more effective, like I said, because there are data to show that there are resistance occurring already. So it's not quite right that helminthiasis or worm infection is being eradicated. And it's important for us to assist the Orang Asli community, because as we know, worm infections basically saps your nutrients. And when they have malnutrition condition, they aren't able to study well. So it is a vicious cycle of low education attainment, poverty, because they are not able to get good jobs. And then it goes on, and you can't eradicate this problem from the community. So again, I think diseases like this really needs to be looked into in a very holistic way as well.
So coming back to your presentation, so what is your views on Malaysia facility regarding AI, blockchain, big data, etc., that currently we have in comparison to other developed countries?
Definitely, we have these facilities, but we can also improve the facilities. And I think the government is in the process to see how things can be moved forward, especially I think with this pandemic. There is a lot of recognition and sort of a heightened recognition to see that we really need to get all these pipelines in place. So we are not totally that bad. We already have all this in place, but definitely we need to further improve it. We need to get the technical people, train more people to be able to utilize this in many areas, not just in terms of IT, but also to utilize this technology in so many other areas. In my faculty of medicine, we also have researchers from the medical, we have clinicians that are basically working with AI people. So you need that kind of interaction more, because it's not easy to work between a clinician and an AI expert. But as you work together, you can see how each other are thinking. It gets easier. And so these are the opportunities that we need to create. It's not just about infrastructure, but everything needs to work in tandem. And when it works in tandem, that's where we can fully utilize this whole technology, Yeah, so the human capital needs to be trained together with the placements of all these infrastructures, and of course, fundings as well.
Okay, I hope there is no more questions. So I would like to thank you, Professor Dr. Yvonne, for spending time with us today